Hello everybody, welcome to the 22nd of October Brexit webinar. I'm glad you could all join us in what's been quite a busy week and will continue to be a busy period for Brexit. I think we're hoping to bring you quite a useful session today, and we'll dive straight in. So starting with the agenda, the first thing we're going to look at is an EU negotiations update, just a brief look at exactly what's happened since the EU Council meeting at the end of last week, and then a bit of a look at how deadlines have shifted for EU negotiations over the past few months. Then looking specifically and more broadly at sector activity and the sort of consistency of the messaging, and a bit of reflection on the government's progress towards its objectives as part of the Brexit negotiation. Then in the second part of the webinar, we'll be joined by Emma Dufour, who will be focusing on more broad guidance for the sector. So firstly, information on freight capacity, which has come out in the past week, some of the batch testing changes, which has happened since our last webinar, and more specific guidance around Article 41 and supplying Northern Ireland, which has also come out this week, and also a bit of a period just getting any questions we can from you guys on particularly regulatory issues, but other guidance before concluding the webinar. So as we normally do, we'll be kicking off with a poll, and this one just to get you in the mood for answering questions. I won't give you much time because it's a bit of a test of how much you've understood the rules, but which of these lockdown tiers imposes the strictest restrictions? So I'm just going to launch the poll now, and yeah, I'm hoping everyone knows, because I'm sure the government's been incredibly clear on its guidance around this so far, and that nobody's cheating by Googling. But please do answer the poll if you can.
So great idea, Tim, to start off with a poll, and welcome everybody. It's great to see many of you online. Those of us who've been with us on the journey over 4 years will know that there's now over 4 years the BIA has been doing these webinars. So do please vote. This one's just for fun, but we'll also take the mood of the sector as we go through with some of the other questions.
So closing the poll, and just a quick look at the results that you can see there. Everyone knows that, yeah, higher restrictions are in the higher tier, which is the higher number. So yeah, thank you everyone for participating in the poll. And
probably we've got colleagues who are living under them as we speak, Tim.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I hope everyone is, and all of their extended families are okay. Moving on to latest news, and back onto Brexit, and a little bit of a comic there about the sort of the fairy tale of Europe. And staying on the fairy tale theme, we thought with Panto season basically being cancelled this year, we've had a little bit of a pantomime.
We're not going to let it be cancelled.
So we've had a little bit of a pantomime over the past week or so with Brexit negotiations, and are they on or are they off? So at the end of last week, oh no, they're off. Yeah, I don't know if we can coordinate that to both do it in unison or get everyone involved. This is the EU, the conclusion of the EU Council meeting on the 15th of October. So this was the deadline that was set on the 7th of September by the Prime Minister on when a free trade agreement would have to be agreed. So subsequent to that meeting, this is the front page of the FT at the end of last week, saying that Johnson breaks off Brexit trade talks. And on the Friday, David Frost's tweet there suggesting he's disappointed by the conclusions of the UK EU negotiations, and particularly the statement out of the EU Council removing this word intensively. On Monday, there was a call between David Frost and Michel Barnier. And David Frost's subsequent tweet was still less than enthusiastic about talks continuing, saying we will stay close in touch. But as you may have seen yesterday, we had these comments from Michel Barnier saying that the Brexit trade deal is within reach, and both David Frost and Michel Barnier have now resumed talks as of this afternoon. So rather than trade negotiations not being on, now we can say, oh yes, they are. We also thought this quote from a Katja Adler piece was just quite interesting and on an EU approach to the negotiations. So one diplomat close to the negotiations rather patronisingly describes this potential EU compromise position, which is around an independent regulator on free level playing field or state aid by comparing the UK to a toddler that doesn't want to eat its vegetables. He said the UK was now looking for alternative arrangements to get the UK to sign up to a deal. He described it as mixing things up to hide the vegetables from the toddler, which I think shows a little bit of the frustration on the EU side with how things have gone over the past week or so. But hopefully they are getting back on track.
So, Tim, I thank you for this. And I know that everybody who's running a biotech business is spending every hour following the Twitter feeds of various individuals involved in high politics. But I think this just goes to show just how extreme the fluctuations are over a very few days, with a very few days left to go, and actually how difficult it is for businesses to plot a steady course within this panto of a discussion. So, on Friday we were all asked to go away and prepare for no deal. And if you follow it today, we're all being led to believe that a trade deal is within reach, and I would expect to see trade deal talks negotiating and intensifying perhaps within 24 hours. And I know the Prime Minister's speaking this evening, so who knows what he'll say. But this is actually quite difficult for any business who's trying to plan for a very serious series of changes to their organisation. And that's really the serious point that I'll stress with ministers and continue to stress on your behalf. And I know how difficult it is, and apologies that we can't bring you clarity, which I think we'd all hope we would like to report to you by this time, with a few weeks only left to go. So with that, we're going to ask the question we've always asked in the last recent ones, which is, do you think the UK and the EU will agree a free trade deal before 31st of December? And to make it panto-like, we've added, oh yes they will, oh no they won't to it, but it's still a serious point. Do you think you were going to see a deal done or not? Your guess is as good as mine. I really am interested, because I think this is the core one. What's the belief in the sector? Where are you at on likelihood of deal or no deal at the moment? And we've got some history on this data to show you in a minute. So our last few minutes for a vote.
Brilliant. Closing the poll now. Thank you, everybody. And sharing the result, which I think is quite interesting.
So 45 are there will be a deal, and 55 are against. Let's have a look at that in comparison, Tim, to where people were a while ago. So we asked this question of this audience in March and in September and October. So in March, you were 34.66, September 22.78. Interestingly, today 45.55. So if you're following the money, or you're betting, you want for a bet, you can see that the odds have shortened here, and the sector is more, although pessimistic about a deal being done, is more optimistic than it was a month ago. And I think we're all looking at this information and taking our own course through it. However, both of these options are still likely, and I think that will dictate where we get to when we talk about the detailed guidance. I'm sorry, it's still unclear, but you can see where your peers are from this. Tim.
So you might have seen this headline in The Guardian last week, with Barnier apparently mocking Boris Johnson's third deadline on the talks. And we thought, with the way deadlines have moved, it might be useful just to spend a minute just talking through what some of those deadlines were. So back on the 15th of June, Boris Johnson suggested that we would need a free trade agreement in place and finalised by the end of the summer. And then, as I've mentioned before, the 7th of September, sorry, the Prime Minister suggested that the 15th of October EU Council meeting, so mid-October, was the deadline for a free trade agreement. And then the 13th of October, so a couple of days before that meeting, he suggested that rather than a time, all that would be needed by that mid-October deadline was a confident sign of a deal, which I think you'd be able to argue they didn't believe was met, which is why we had the problems that we had at the end of last week and beginning of this. Conversely, I think from the EU's perspective, the deadline has always been the end of October, and this is to allow time for the deal to firstly to be negotiated, but also then legal checks line by line to make sure everything's in order. That would need to be translated into multiple different languages, and then multiple parliaments and assemblies around Europe would need to ratify it. But I think since the EU Council meeting last week, we're now seeing suggestions that the deadline might be mid-November, and that an emergency Brexit summit might need to be held. We're definitely running out of time, and I think all sides know that. So I would imagine this is the final deadline, unless we get some kind of framework of an agreement and then a delay to Brexit. But I think anything on that is complete conjecture, so we don't really know.
Tim, and I think the important point we've covered in previous webinars is that even if you get to a deal in mid-November, there is the chance of it being derailed by, depending on the nature of the deal, depends on the nature of the what needs to go before regional or national parliaments. You talked about the nature of those deals. So even if we see a deal, we'll then have to have a look at it to work out whether who and what can stop various bits of it, whether that is allowed. And we've got previous webinars on what that can look like. But if that still remains relevant, I think here, and it just means that the deadlines are against which almost impossible for businesses to make meaningful changes in very few short weeks when we've been on it for over 4 years. Maybe I can talk to the other thing about time is running out. So time is running out. The government keep telling us time is running out with 71 days to go. And I think, the challenge of this is reflected in the joint statement we saw from the Confederation of British Industry earlier in the week, calling for a pragmatic approach to make sure that the deal is done. And that's pretty much the business community united. Interestingly, if you look at our sector, a great interview with Richard Torbett, my colleague at the ABPI, looking for pointing out some of the specific challenges if there is no deal. And I think we've also seen this in the chemical sector as well, which obviously underpins some of the manufacturing of core pharmaceutical products. So I think, yes, there's time running out, but there is commensurate concerns about this in the media from those of us in the business community, and we're also taking those points privately to ministers. I think I'll just reflect on what we've been doing consistently for many years, and thank you for those of you who have been on the journey with us since, and you may remember this document from September 2016, shortly after the referendum, the report onto the UK-EU Life Science Steering Committee, the ERG group as it is now known within government, to ministers for how to maintain and grow the UK's leading life science sector in the context of leading the EU. Our messages have always been driven from there about our priorities: regulatory alignment, research, people, customs, the benefits of a deep and close future relationship, the challenges of our complicated supply chains and long lead times, and the potential negative impact on patients as a result of things changing. We've been consistent. This has been our lodestar, our guiding light, developed with you, the members, and checked in regularly with you through the years, make sure this was still what you wanted. So we worked on this area. But I think if you reflect, if you think about where we've been on the journey on the other side, how's the UK government approached our sector and Brexit? And I'm taking the long view here, Tim, if you can move us forward. We engaged first with Greg Clark and Theresa May as the Secretary of State for Business and the Prime Minister. You'll remember that they had the Health Secretary and the Business Secretary calling for post-Brexit cooperation with the EU on drugs. Early on in 2016, we had positive engagement through the Industrial Strategy and the Life Science Council, and significant endorsements of the role of our sector from the Prime Minister then. We've continued to engage with the current Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, through recent years, and he's been very kind to make promises on behalf of the sector, put in place a huge amount of work to ensure that Brexit works positively for our life science industry in the summer. And if you then look at what's being said this week, and this is a quote from Michael Gove on the TV programme on the Martha Show at the weekend, the steps that businesses need to take, whether or not we have Canada Free Trade Agreement or leave on Australian terms, are very, very similar. And the great thing is that business has risen to that challenge in a very pragmatic way. I think that's at some distance from where we've been encouraged to believe that we might be, and we've seen a significant change really during this year, during COVID, in the government's positioning. Obviously, governments are allowed to change their mind, and we've had general elections and new parliaments and all of those sorts of things. But this is quite difficult for businesses to plan for a major change when we've seen consistency from our asks and perhaps quite some change in tone and tack from the UK government, and I think that that's a contrasting challenge for us, given that we're still not got a deal. We still don't know where we're going, and we're 71 days away. So another way of thinking about this that I think about is, how's the UK government doing against what it promised from the break from the EU? And obviously we'd have to do this as a teacher assessment, because under COVID-19 there's no exams to be taken. But how are we doing against this sort of scorecard is one way that I've been thinking about this for our sector. So have they brought home the bacon? Are there trade deals that are beyond the EU that are making things easier or better for our sector? You've seen the signing of the Japanese trade deal. There's one with Ghana that's not going very well at the moment. There's talk of one with the US, but actually none of these are, beyond the Japanese one, are delivered, and I don't think the Japanese one moves heaven and earth in terms of benefit for our sector. An independent sovereign regulator leading the world. I think the MHRA have adapted very, very well in difficult situations. They've gone from being, if you like, the host or the home of the European regulatory system, deeply embedded and a leader there, to starting to pioneer a new role, joining up to the American-led initiative with the Canadians and the Australians under Project Orbis, which may be of use in some areas of oncology, and joining the tier of countries, Singapore, Australia, Canada, and others in a new scheme, which they'll join in the new year. I had a little smile when I looked at reducing bureaucracy and unnecessary red tape, and I know many companies have told me the amount of work that this has taken, both understanding and preparing for changes which could otherwise have gone into some of the things which perhaps from my perspective might have moved things forward for patients a little faster. If you're preparing for a never-ending change of Brexit things, then you can't do more R&D, and you've only got a limited budget, and you've got to work out where it goes. So I think that's one we should focus on. And obviously maintaining collaboration through scientific research and positive funding is important at the introduction of this for our sector. I reflect on what I hear from colleagues in academia and whether elements of that are moving ahead. Obviously, we've had commitments to 2.4%. No comprehensive spending review in sight at the moment, obviously in part because of COVID, and we look to see whether Horizon 2020 or other forms of collaboration continue, or whether those are boosted by other ones around the world. Are we attracting more clinical trials as a result of this through innovation or new things? We've obviously got fantastic work going on in recovery. The COVID-19 trial producing valid scientific results really have helped to the globe there. But I also know that people are struggling in other areas, and whether the UK is top of the shop for global trials, I think you'll know from your own companies. Talent has obviously been a core element of this, and are we able to continue to attract the brightest and best? You'll know from your own communities whether that's something you're able to do. I think we're starting to see some clarity on that, and that's there. And then, of course, investment in the biotech sector. We were delighted to talk about the record levels of investment into the UK sector this last quarter, $1 billion into the UK sector in the last quarter. I think I'm always nervous of the difference between correlation and causation. I think perhaps it's the fantastic bedrock of scientific excellence with brilliant entrepreneurial companies that I would put as the rationale for that. But certainly we are continuing to attract investment into the biotech sector through this period, which is great. So even on their own terms, I think this is where we should judge it, and you yourselves will have your own grade card for this, and is perhaps how we should look to think about it as we go forward into 21, certainly how I'm thinking about it. But perhaps turning away from some of the context, it's useful to dive into sector-specific thinking, and I know many of you are in the detail, and that's why it's fantastic to be joined by Emma Dufour. Emma not only chairs our RAC committee, a Regulatory Affairs Advisory Committee, but she has been an absolute stalwart for us, and for me, somewhere between an oracle and Dumbledore, somebody I can always rely on, who always knows the score and has very sage advice for us, and pulls together our excellent community. So Emma, thank you very much for joining us. I know that we often have questions and perspectives on regulatory from members, and thank you for joining us. Tim.
Yeah, welcome Emma, and Yeah, looking forward to your contributions on some of these points. So diving in on sort of specific UK government guidance for business, we thought it would be helpful to talk about firstly guidance you should action now, and also guidance that we're still waiting for. So there's a list here of guidance we feel you should action now, and some of this will be going into more detail on a little later in the webinar. First of all is the MHRA end of transition guidance. This was initially published on the 1st of September, so has been out for a while now, and hopefully everyone is aware of it, but it has received some additional updates this week, and so is still worth looking at and making yourself familiar with if you're not already. The border operating model, again, has been out for a little while, and I think last month all VAT registered businesses should have received a letter on new trading arrangements. So all of this is getting ready for the new customs arrangements and potential tariffs that might come in the event of no deal. Article 41 guidance, again, this is part of the MHRA guidance and was published this week. We're going into more detail on that specifically on a later slide. Making sure you sign up for the trader support service. So if you move goods in or out of Northern Ireland, this is an extra service of support you can get. And then finally, there was some guidance on using personal data after the transition period, which might be relevant to a number of companies. Secondly, guidance to check soon that is perhaps less urgent. So firstly, batch testing. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later. We're suggesting this is something to keep an eye on, because some of the changes we'll focus on later may not affect your business if we get a mutual recognition agreement, or there's some of the principles of an MRA in a free trade agreement. And secondly, emergency freight capacity. So you should be able to register for emergency freight capacity now, but exact details of schedules and routes and ticketing prices won't be available until the 16th of November, and you won't be able to book that capacity until the end of November. And again, we're going into that in a little bit more detail. And then finally, guidance we're still waiting for, and obviously the free trade agreement itself might change a lot of things if we get it, but we know that we're still waiting for a lot of guidance around the Northern Ireland Protocol, including issues around the continuity of supply in Northern Ireland and how Article 40 may affect Article 41, and those are some issues that we'll go into a little bit later as well. Steve or Emma, I don't know if you wanted to come in, or Emma, if you had any thoughts on other guidance that might be particularly important that we're still waiting for.
So I think I'd just say at this point that it is important to know that some came out and then has been modified, and there's more to come. So it's really important to monitor this area. I think that the initial guidance that came out gave us a good sense of the framework we're likely to be operating under next year. But the licensing and pharmacovigilance areas, there's still some very detailed guidance awaited, hoping that'll emerge in the next couple of weeks. But it is somewhat caught up in the broader political debate and the final direction of travel that we take. So important to monitor this area, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics in a moment.
Brilliant, thanks Emma. I just say that this is all part of the government's Check, Change, Go campaign. And you can find more specifically on gov.uk/transition, including a sort of survey to make sure your business is prepared. And we've provided links to each of these guidance where they are available on our biabrexit.org front page. So make sure you visit that page after this meeting if you're not familiar with any of these, or want a resource that just has all of the links relevant and guidance relevant to our sector in one place. So with all of that, oh, sorry?
Yeah, no, maybe if I can just comment on this. I mean, I think the challenge that we face as businesses is obviously that there is an ask of the sector to be ready to go. And the answer is you can only be ready if there's clarity on the detail that you need to be ready. And I know that companies have busted up working on much of this stuff. Much of it has come late. Some of it we saw last year, and there's been great working with the MHRA on elements of this. But it's very difficult to be ready for something when you're unsure about elements of it, and we still don't have the full guidance. So it's impossible, I think, at this stage for a sector which has been clear with the powers that be that we have complicated and long supply chains to expect to flick a switch and be ready to go with whatever comes out. And still we don't have clarity on, still we don't have detail. So we're put in an impossible position. And I think, my view is that companies have done everything they can, and they've worked very, very hard on it. But that doesn't mean to say that I can confidently say that there will be no challenges or no difficulties going forward. And that's not for the want of what companies have been doing, because you simply can't do it if you don't know what you're being asked to do.
Absolutely.
I think we're being asked to take risk-based decisions with very little information. I think it would be how I'd summarize it.
I think that's very neat, and we could potentially put that on a mug or something. It would sort of sum up the latter stages of this year as another government slogan. With that in mind, we're interested to hear how prepared your company is for the end of transition, and there's a few options here. So basically, are you well prepared? Do you have no concerns? Do you have some concerns but anticipate managing issues effectively? On the current trajectory, do you feel you may have supply concerns, or on the current trajectory, are you extremely worried about potential supply issues? So I'm just launching that poll now. And we're really interested to hear how you're doing, and I think some of this will hopefully feed into some of the messaging that we're pushing back to government on, or things that we're reflecting to ministers, just to understand where you as a sector or we as an industry really are. So leave it open just a little bit longer. I can see a few people are still voting. And closing it now for any final votes. Thank you, everybody. And sharing the results. So you can see there we're sort of firmly in the. There are some concerns. There are, I think, about obviously 10% of people have no concerns whatsoever. But generally, people feel like they're going to manage supply issues effectively. But there are a couple of people who have some extreme concerns and issues they need to resolve. And I think that reflects what we've been hearing anecdotally as well. I think particularly given that each company or each business is in a very unique situation, and each product may have its own individual challenges, and some may cope better with those or the guidance that's out there than others.
Thank you. And I think how I'm thinking about this, Tim and Emma, is I know that the Department of Health are endeavouring to be in direct contact with companies that supply medicines, medical devices and other things into the NHS. I think if you're in the bottom two categories here, you have supply concerns, or particularly if you're extremely worried and you've not engaged with the DH, I would encourage you to do so through the email that they probably have sent you through Steve Oldfield's gang. If they haven't, do please come to us, because I think we should connect you and make sure that your concerns are well understood with people that you're operating with, and we should try and minimise these for the good of patients as best we can. I'm not saying we can wave a wand on these things, but if you are concerned and you're not having joy, do please let us know, and we will use our networks to make sure you're connected in the best way to do what we can to overcome these. Thank you. This is in line with my expectation, and I know how hard all of you have worked to get to this place.
And yeah, just to sort of reiterate Steve's point, I know there is a team at the Cabinet Office looking at problems around end of transition. So if you do have any unique problems, as Steve says, make sure you get in touch or let us know, and we can sort of feed those up to make sure they are considered and hopefully addressed.
I think the same advice can go for regulatory concerns as well. The MHRA are willing and ready for those conversations for specific products from companies, where they have a particular concern.
Brilliant. Yeah,
I think don't wait is the answer. If you and there may be routes. I'm not saying that we can resolve them, but we can make sure that they get to the right places. Thank you. Really helpful.
So moving on to a little bit more of the detail, as we mentioned, freight capacity announcement. So you may have seen this originally in Steve Oldfield's 3rd of August letter, suggesting that additional routes be laid on away from areas of potential border disruption. So not Calais to Dover, basically. And this additional government secured freight capacity would be for category 1 goods, which includes medical products and medicines. So as you said in the earlier slides, the takeaway for now is to register, and the link is there, but also on the BIA Brexit website. And then when you have that registered, you should be given a unique supplier access code, which you should pass to your logistics provider. And as I mentioned previously, details of sailing schedules and the ticketing system will be available from the 16th of November, and tickets will be purchasable from late November. And there's also an express freight service, which we have less information on, but we're assuming that more details on that and how it can be booked and the prices will be available in November as well. So make sure you are considering this as an option, particularly if you have concerns. And we don't know how many people may have heard of it already, but we've got our final poll, and we're just interested to know who may already be planning to register for the additional freight supply organised by government.
So I think if you have registered, please say that you do plan to. So this is we plan to or we have versus we're not planning to. And the only thing I'd add to this is I think I'm right in saying that if you did register for it last year before No Deal, you have to re-register for it again this year. Your registration for last year, you said yes please if you were getting ready for No Deal, doesn't count for 2020. You've got to re-register. And please make sure that you do. Is that right, Tim? I'm sure I heard that.
I believe that's the case, but I can clarify that and make sure that's on our website. But I think either way, if you are concerned, registering again is definitely the way to go.
And I think basically the registration process doesn't force you to use it, but it means that you'll be sent the emails when it becomes available, and if you think you need it, you'll then be able to book. So I'll let the result happen and then I'll talk about it.
So I'm just closing. I'd say we only had about 25% of people responding, which I think shows a potential lack of interest in the service from attendees on this webinar anyway. And then yeah, hopefully you can see the results there.
Thank you. That's useful to know. And I think it's, as you say, this has something to do with roles within companies and who does what, but it is an important route, and if there is disruption, this will be a very, very important route, I think, for continued flow of goods if you're moving things through. I know a lot of people have done stockpiling and other mitigations as well, so thank you for that.
Brilliant, thank you everybody. And moving on to the next slide, I think this is yours, Steve.
Well, I'll start and then I'll go to perhaps let Emma come in. So you may have seen in the trade press the headline at the bottom. That is me suggesting that the guidance was ill-considered on batch testing. And I mean, broadly, this is because we had in September 2 slightly different worded pieces of guidance come out, and this is the point Emma makes about some of the shifting sands of guidance. They're not massively different, but I think number one, still considered if it's this marginal to make 2 things, because it just means that it makes it inconsistent for people. Secondarily, I'm concerned that the specifics for our sector may have been may have been put within a blanket overall government position on all sectors, and I think that the MHRA are very sensible and very pragmatic about what it is that is doable and is meaningful and is appropriate for our sector. And you know, I think it's wise that things are left sector by sector on specific guidance areas. And the real one why this matters to me is I look at the amount of COVID-19 vaccines that are likely to have to go through batch testing, and the pressure there will be on batch testing capability, both within the UK, and having a blanket position that moves that process forward, because even though you have to be ready for it after 2 years, means that you have to get ready for it sometime in advance of that. Having a blanket position and sort of enforcing it in a period where you think actually it might be pragmatic to focus on areas that are really of need or really the focus areas would be where I was at that, and that's why I consider this to be ill-considered. But Emma, you're far closer to regulatory detail than I am, and welcome your view on this one.
Yeah, so maybe just a very brief step back for those who may be less familiar with the situation. The initial guidance that was published was clear that for medicines that are being imported from the EU or the EEA into Great Britain would not require any additional testing or release or checks, and would be able to flow in freely based on the checks already done in an EU country. And that had been the position that had been made very clear by the agency. And then just a matter of weeks later, that was a caveat added to that this was for 2 years. So initially it was an open-ended arrangement, and now it's been given a caveat of 2 years, and that's to align with the broader government position of standstill, that the current arrangements will apply for the next 2 years while we evaluate the potential future framework. And I completely agree with Steve, this is really unhelpful, because during the next 2 years, the position may change. We don't know if mutual recognition agreements may be aligned upon. There may be other changes that result in the UK continuing to recognise batch testing and release that's been conducted in an EU or an EEA country. And so this is a risk-based decision we're being asked to make. Do you invest now in significant testing capability and professionals who would have to be placed in the UK ready for something that might happen in 2 years' time? And that's a very, very difficult ask for anyone in industry, whether you're small, medium or large company. And so I think the unpredictability this brings is very unwelcome, and is an example of our sector-specific needs not being understood, and a blanket approach being taken across a government policy.
And I think the other thing, Emma, I fully agree, is it's very difficult for us to not know that another set of guidance might come out in another 3 weeks. So in my mind, this is one where I think it's a watch and wait rather than take immediate action this side of the turn of the year. But even so, 2 years is not a great period of time for making significant change or recruiting and making big changes such as this is predicated. But even so, I think it's not ideal.
No, I think obviously every company will have to make that risk-based decision for itself, but I think something to note is that the capacity does not exist to test every batch that's imported into Great Britain. So, even if every company, which is highly unlikely, chose to say, right, let's get ready for this and start, putting in place everything, it would not be practically possible. We do not have the capacity. Some of our lab testing capacity in Great Britain has closed, as the UK testing was no longer possible to recognise for European-based product. So we've actually got less capacity than we had before. So there's a real practical barrier here, even if we were to all suddenly say, right, we'll take the chance and put this in place. So I think it's something to very closely watch. And I think we will continue to make the case to say mutual recognition arrangements are the way forward in the interests of both the UK and the EU.
Yeah, and I look at, in announcements this week that NIBSC are going to be doing, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, who do some of this work for the MHRA, within the MHRA, they're focusing on being a reference lab for COVID-19. They're under doing some very important global work. So equally, I think there's the challenge of capacity for a regulator to do this. And I know I'm conscious that there's only so much regulatory capacity in the regulator to do this. So I think this is one for pragmatism, and I think we all look to work together on this one rather than be driven by an ideological deadline or a red pen in the heart of Whitehall.
Absolutely. Moving on. So Article 40 and Article 41, as we mentioned. So this is sort of more specifically a mechanism to supply Northern Ireland, and it focuses on Articles 40 and 41 of the withdrawal agreement, which refer to goods placed on the market. So what the MHRA has done has provided a lot of guidance and information and clarification around how Article 41 could be interpreted to allow those goods on the market, but particularly to continue to be sold in Europe, but particularly to continue to be sold in Northern Ireland. So basically, they have to be placed on the market before 11 p.m. on the 31st of December 2020, which is obviously midnight Central European time. And there's a number of specific requirements that have to be met by the product. So first, it has to be manufactured, it has to exist. It has to be certified by a qualified person who doesn't necessarily have to live in Northern Ireland. And it has to be made available for sale or supply, plus a transfer of ownership to another legal entity, and that can be a another legal entity in the same company if it exists, or an offer to purchase or take ownership by another legal entity. And if a product has already been sold from one company or legal entity to another, then it will have met all of these criteria already. So there's more detail on this on the MHRA website, and again, the direct link to that is on our BIA Brexit portal, and that went up this week. So if you're concerned about supplying Northern Ireland, this is definitely something to check. But there are a number of questions that still may lead this to change in some way in the future, which aren't not necessarily in the MHRA's control. So the first is Article 40, which is the definition of goods placed on the market, which is as part of the wider, I think, wider negotiations between the UK and the EU, and obviously defining goods placed on the market will define how these requirements apply and which products it can actually work for. The second, it's not entirely clear who exactly is enforcing the system, but there will be evidential requirement on wholesalers and others who are moving products or trying to prove that the good is placed on the market before 11 PM on the 31st of December. And also a slight concern around importation into Northern Ireland. So if goods are technically placed on the market or sold, but then moved from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, is that still an import into Northern Ireland? And will there be issues under the free trade agreement that, or under the relationship between Great Britain and the withdrawal agreement and Europe that may cause problems there? So which we're not quite sure about. I don't know if you have any reflections on this, on Article 41 and the guidance that's come out this week, Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So again, just for those who may not have had a chance to read the details, we're talking about Articles 40 and 41 of the EU Withdrawal Agreement and how they apply the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it's worth reminding ourselves that under that, Northern Ireland continues to operate under the European regulatory system, and that's the background in driving this situation. So this guidance is about at what point are products still available and placed on the market before the end of our post-transition period. So this 11 PM on the 31st of December is about if the products are placed on the market before that point in time, none of the new requirements will apply. Those goods can continue to flow with none of the additional requirements that kick in at 11 on the 31st of December. So in the new year, if you're moving product from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, that is an importation into the EU. And there is a number of additional testing and release and requirements that kick in. But if the product is placed on the market before 11 PM, the goods can continue to move from a regulatory perspective without any change to the current arrangements that are in place. And this is yet another example of the guidance evolving. So the first guidance was published with a much simpler statement about how you can tell whether or not you've met the requirements for already placing your product on the market. And then it became clear very quickly that further clarification was needed. People were ambiguous in their interpretations of how to decide whether or not product would be available. And this relates directly to stockpiling and ensuring that the supply chain and warehouse and wholesale distribution system has enough product to keep going while some of these new arrangements are put in place. And the second change to the guidance that came through was a result of an interpretation of Article 40 and the definitions that are described. So really important, I think, as we manage our supplies to think about ensuring you can meet these criteria for all the products that you want to ensure in your supply chain to give yourself that buffer and that stockpile if that's one of your strategies and risk mitigation strategies.
Thanks. I mean, my very small brain on this, I think this shows that the complexity of building a stockpile, even to support a position into Northern Ireland in the first few weeks of next year, is quite complicated and not entirely clear, which is what this point is. And then there's still a much bigger fog of uncertainty about how operating in a Northern Ireland environment for the longer term may operate, and that's in the bucket of advice not yet, or guidance not yet issued, or certainly not in a way that we can help you interpret it for the long term. And even the short-term guidance is very tricky to operate and is not yet fully got there. So I think Sarah Fry has had a number of questions on this, and I think, Sarah, the simple answer to this is is that you make the right point. The whole Northern Ireland situation seems very confusing. It is. We're endeavouring to unpack it, but I don't think we're going to give you the bottom line on this, because there is still no guidance in some area, and even where there's endeavoured to be guidance, it's not clear that it's straightforward to operate if you're looking for a stockpiling strategy.
I think that's correct, Steve. I think what we're debating here is what will define your product will continue to be following the current regulatory requirements. If you get your product meeting these criteria by 11 p.m. on the 31st of December, nothing changes. That product continues to move through with no additional regulatory checks required. The guidance that's missing is how things will operate for everything that's manufactured and released after that date, and that's what we're still waiting for. Just briefly on the question of how will this be enforced, our latest understanding is that will be through your routine inspections from the MHRA as a holder of a wholesale dealer's license, for example. They'll be just looking back retrospectively to ensure all the correct documentation will be in place, and that was our latest understanding.
Oh, that's helpful, thank you, Emma. And diving into Northern Ireland itself, and as we touched on sort of issues around how medicines can continue to be supplied to Northern Ireland, and Article 4041 is one answer to that. And I know that government is also looking at more long-term solutions for whatever the future relationship with the EU looks like, and whether that might be direct supply from the EU, the Common Transit Convention, which we've spoken about previously, where things may move into GB but still be considered in transit before they arrive, and so in effect be still considered direct supply from the EU. But within that, there's still a number of questions around the Falsified Medicines Directive, particularly linking to the packaging and labelling that products may require in Northern Ireland, and also regulatory differences between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland that may make some potential solutions, for example, using Republic of Ireland packaging, slightly more difficult. There is more additional MHRA guidance which has come out this week clarifying some of this, and I think we're anticipating more, but I think the big question is still around the clarification of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is part of the joint committee negotiations between Europe and Great Britain, and we won't have a lot of that clarity until that has concluded, and we're still not sure exactly when that will happen. I don't know, again, if you wanted to come in, Emma, on any of these particular points.
Maybe just briefly, and then maybe we can see if there's any specific questions in a moment. I think the guidance is making an assumption, which is not an unreasonable one, that the Northern Ireland Protocol as written will be enforced. So the guidance that we do have, assumes that any kind of movement from GB into Northern Ireland will be considered an importation into the EU, and that's the basis of the guidance. But as you quite rightly say, that could shift depending on what kind of agreement is ultimately reached, if we get one.
Brilliant. Well, I think this and previous slides have thrown up a lot of questions specifically about Northern Ireland, and as I said, I think the first one from Sarah Fire, how long do you think the separate arrangements for Northern Ireland will continue for? Is it expected to be indefinite? I think I've got an answer for that, but I think you've probably got a more informed one, Emma, if you want to have a go.
Well, I'll try, and then you can correct me if I get this wrong. But my understanding is that the Northern Ireland Protocol itself, is initially applicable for 4 years, and so the expectation is the regulatory guidance will follow that. So all the time the Northern Ireland Protocol is in place, the relevant guidance from MHRA will apply. I think it's a really important takeaway that guidance is different now for Northern Ireland and Great Britain. We're no longer talking about UK guidance. In many, many situations, in the majority, we're talking about the regulatory guidance that applies to Northern Ireland and the regulatory guidance that applies to Great Britain. I think that's an important takeaway. Initially 4 years for Northern Ireland, initially mostly 2 years for Great Britain in this standstill period.
And I think, yeah, just sort of building on that, I think that using that word indefinite, and I think there will be some new permanent arrangement for Northern Ireland that Northern Ireland will continue to be different to the rest of Great Britain and distinct from the EU potentially as well, until it, well, perhaps votes to join Europe, but that's a different challenge for a different day. The second question, regarding Northern Ireland again, will the MHRA have access to EU processes as the agency responsible for Northern Ireland? I don't know the answer to that, but Yeah,
these are good questions. I mean, my view is that there's in the don't know, this is why we're saying that there's not clarity on everything yet.
I can add a little bit to that, not a lot, but a little bit. And then another key takeaway is MHRA definitely remains the regulator responsible for Northern Ireland, so that does not change. So it will remain the regulator enforcing and responsible for medicines and medical devices in both Northern Ireland and GB. And in order to fulfil its responsibilities for Northern Ireland, it will need to be able to, in some way, engage with the European system. And it remains something under discussion as to whether or not they'll have access to databases, but that is something that is a live discussion.
And I think that also answers the next question. Assuming new drugs licensed centrally by the EMA from January 2021 will be available in Northern Ireland, do you perceive there being access to these drugs in the rest of the UK from Northern Ireland, or will patients be hot-footing it to Northern Ireland for treatment? And I think, as you said, yeah.
So I think for that one, so again, our current understanding is that centralised procedure approvals from next year will apply to Northern Ireland as well as the rest of the EU. So it will remain in scope for those. And then it will be a company's decision if it wishes to license that product in Great Britain. It's a separate territory. Just like any other part of the world, each company will make a decision where it wants to license its medicines, assuming you do, which I think is a fair assumption for the majority of cases. There will be a series of regulatory pathways and options to bring that product into Great Britain from a regulatory licensing point of view. And then the MHRA's ambition is that there will be no or very small delay between the two timeframes. They're certainly intending to offer us pathways that allow product to be licensed for Great Britain in the same or not faster timeframes than EU will make products available for Northern Ireland. But that's the licensing guidance that has not been published yet, so more details to come.
And Emma, I think it's right to say that that depends somewhat on the final wording of the Internal Markets Act, which I believe is still an Internal Markets Bill going through the UK Parliament, which will give the overall framework in which the UK as a market, as a single market, operates, and then how that is interpreted in the EU-UK deal or no deal scenario. So there's some meta law that will then inform guidance, which is not yet written. So apologies, the third dimension of chess always brings us in on these ones.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the one thing that will always be true is you'll have to have a license to sell a product in Great Britain. So whatever arrangements from a trading and movement of goods perspectives are agreed, you will not be able to sell a product in Great Britain without a license. So it may be that that's a very simple process if those arrangements play out in a certain way, or it may be different processes. But regardless, whether we're talking unfettered access, direct access, different flows, something that's a constant is that you cannot sell a product without a product license in Great Britain. And so they have a number of pathways that are developed, and each of those will be applicable depending on those scenarios, Steve, that you quite rightly point out.
And on a similar theme, will existing UK national licenses be valid in Northern Ireland, or will we need something additional to meet EU requirements?
So that divides opinion, the answer to that question. You may need to consult a lawyer to officially get an answer on that one, and then you still may get different answers on that one. So certainly the current position from the government and the MHRA would be a UK national licence, is exactly what it says, would be applicable in Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Another perspective on that is that for new products coming through, they must be approved under the European regulatory system, which will require them to participate in either the centralised procedure or the mutual recognition procedure. So I think we have to say that is an area of ambiguity and should be finalised with the last batch of guidance that comes out. But for existing products with a national licence, there's general agreement they will continue to be applicable to Northern Ireland and Great Britain. It's more products moving forward.
And do we know if the request for a phase-in of the Northern Ireland Protocol is being considered within the negotiations. I think the simple answer to that is yes, but we still don't know whether that is how that is going to work, or whether it comes in or not, and that is part of the wider negotiations. So so watch this space. Regarding Article 40, if you've stockpiled and have 6 weeks in your warehouse, is it correct that if you have not sold this stock, you'll be subject to new rules regarding the import, as it has not been transferred to a different legal entity? I'm assuming this is a warehouse in Great Britain rather than Northern Ireland. Do you want to come in there, Emma?
So it goes back to those criteria. So if you've not met those criteria by the 11 p.m. on the 31st of December, then that product would be under the new requirements, the new rules. But if you have met those criteria, it doesn't matter so much where physically it is. It's whether you've had it tested, released, made available for sale, and have either a written or verbal agreement to sell the product. Those criteria that were laid out in your slide earlier. If you've met those criteria, the product could continue through the supply chain. If you haven't, then it would be under the new requirements.
And I think that's the final question. So it's sort of coming to the conclusion there, and any final thoughts, if anyone has any?
I have a couple, Tim. So first off, I wouldn't want to be up against Emma on Mastermind, because her ability to grab a fast-moving work of detail and then turn it into easy to understand answers is immense. So I'm sure the complete works of Shakespeare, or the Star Wars trilogy, or whatever you chose, Emma, you would be entirely on top of. And thank you so much for taking us through what is a kaleidoscopic piece of very technical and very, very important regulatory environment. I know how important it is for people just to be able to chat, share, bounce things off at this important time. And thank you to you and Regulatory Affairs colleagues for participating and engaging in this. I think it really is helpful, because even if there's not exact clarity, knowing what there's not exact clarity on is helpful in itself. If I can bring us to a conclusion, I suppose where I'm imagining we may be in the coming days is I'm going to get a message which says, well, that the deal's back on, we're all going to be fine, don't worry, Steve, it's all, we know what you guys want, and it's all going to be fine, is where I imagine we could be in a couple of days' time. And if we are there, then I'll say, that's fantastic, it's brilliant that you've heard the message of the sector, UK government, you know what we want, go get it, go get a deal done. That would be fantastic. We need particular clarity on Northern Ireland, MHRA and EMA to be able to have a working relationship, and MRA is vital, and it'd be great if there was a science and innovation deal. But we've always had to plan on the worst case scenario, as the cartoon here says, and things may go wrong for whatever purpose, whatever reasons, and that leaves us absolutely no time now to make change. You can't have a deadline in the middle of November and expect us to be ready 6 weeks later. We can't prepare for things that we've not got guidance on. We are doing our best. The sector has moved heaven and earth to be where it's at for this big change, but we can't guarantee things that we have not been given clarity on which to guide from. So I think as I go from here, the message I'm taking is the sector has worked damn hard on this, has worked really, really hard to get ready, is as ready as it can be, but it can't be ready in places where there is no guidance. We need the last bits of those guidance, we need clarity on that, and we will get ready to operate. And that's really what I think we are in what has been a fast-moving and is likely to continue to be fast-moving for our next period of time. But it's with common endeavour that we do it, and thank you very much for the expertise and the sharing of this from everybody. Tim.
Yes, thank you so much. And just moving on to the resources slide. So there's a lot of links on here, but as we mentioned, the biabrexit.org has them all as well. And just a couple of future events. So some of you from previous webinars will remember this sort of timetable slide of where we are with the negotiations. The next Brexit BIA webinar should be the 3rd week of November, which will be 1 week after the mid-November EU Council Emergency Summit, if it happens. So we should have a much better idea then of what an FTA deal, whether we have an FTA deal, what it might look like, and and hopefully a few answers to the questions and uncertainty.
We're a bit broken record on this, to be fair, Tim, aren't we? We always say next one we'll tell you all the answers, and the next one we come along and we say we can't tell you all the answers. So yeah, I mean, I think this is, well, if we are on the road to success, we'll have some ideas. If we're not on the road to success, then I think we'll also have some further ideas. Apologies if I could bring this to a conclusion and say we're not going to do another one, then I would be in some respects relieved, but I don't think we're there yet, are we? We're still going to have an evolving situation, and if this is the wrong timing for members, do please let us know as well.
And then we also just wanted to highlight our annual Bioprocess UK conference and some of the programme highlights from that, particularly sort of COVID-19 and vaccines, therapies, biomanufacturing landscape, digital skills and industry, and the Dragon's Den style session, which should be quite good fun. And
virtual pub night, Tim. You haven't sold. I think they can still book and get the beer tasting, which is proving very, very popular with our bioprocess community. Not only will they drink a beer, but they'll also explain to you what it is you have to do to make a COVID-19 vaccine, which they've been working out very hard on, and it's going to be a fantastic program.
So hopefully the program sells itself, and I hope to see as many of you there as possible. That brings the webinar to a close. So yeah, thank you so much, Emma, and thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us for this month's webinar. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you again next month.
Thank you. Any updates will be in newscast, which I hope you're all signed up to. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Tim.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody.